Hi, welcome to the Mom of Many podcast. I'm Tammy, your host, and today we have a great question from a viewer. So let's take a listen.
Hey Tammyma, I have 4 young children, and here's my question. How do you encourage a genuine apology? We can get our kids to say, I'm sorry, but sometimes when you look in their eyes, you can tell they really did not mean it. So, what kind of conversations do you have with your kids that encourages empathy and gets their heart involved in an apology?
That's a great question. I've actually had a couple of emails that are pretty similar to this question, and different variations, but different, but pretty similar. And the issue of helping our kids to feel empathetic or to feel remorseful or to say sorry and mean it. So this is a great question, and so thank you for that. So I guess I want to say that raising 46 kids, I recognize that they're all wired differently. Some of my kids are super compassionate. Some of them are empathetic from a very young age, and some of them are not. I have a couple that actually laugh when somebody gets hurt. And so it's every kid is wired differently. And so I just want to start off with that. It's not always how you raise them. There's something inside of them that some kids just respond differently than others. And so in human psychology, we talk about nature and versus nurture. And I'm not sure how much of that is a part of either nature or nurture, how much my kids were raised different in their earliest years before they came to us. And some of them just have something different in their DNA. And so regardless of where or how these things kind of happen, um, we can still help our kids. We really can. So I think about your question, how to connect their heart with their words of obedience. So he's obeying and saying, I'm sorry, but his heart, he's kind of like, you can kind of tell he doesn't really mean it. It reminds me of a funny story I heard once where a 3-year-old was standing up at the kitchen table, was standing on his chair and jumping. And the parents were like, sit down. And he sat down kind of defiantly. And then he stood back up again. And they said, sit down right now. And he sat back down. And then after a few minutes, he stood back up. We told you to sit down right now. Enough is enough. And he sat back down and he said, on the outside, I'm sitting down, but on the inside, I'm standing up. And so he had this kind of sense of rebellion, and so how do we help that, right? That's our biggest issue. How do you help kids not only apologize on the outside, but on the inside too? And so let's start off first by admitting one thing for all of us. It is hard to apologize. It is hard to say sorry. Let's be real. Is there anybody listening right now who finds it super easy to apologize? My guess is probably not. Why? Why? That's my first question. I'll answer it in a second. Why does a 2-year-old struggle with saying I'm sorry? I've seen it again and again. I've seen 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds, and even the youngest of children, cry as they have to say I'm sorry. All they have to do is say I'm sorry, and they start crying. Why? It's a real struggle. Why? And I think we know the answer, right? It's pride. It's pride. Let me be perfectly clear here. It might be easy to say I'm sorry when you accidentally bump into something, right? Like someone, okay, oh, I spilled your water. I'm so sorry. Those kind of stories are kind of easy for us. But what about when we knowingly hurt somebody or mess up with someone that we love and really kind of mess up and do something wrong? It produces a visceral response in me. That's how deep my pride runs. And so why are we surprised to hear that our kids struggle with saying I'm sorry when we ourselves struggle with saying I'm sorry? Or maybe you guys don't struggle. Maybe I'm the only one. But in case you do, you know that the core reason we struggle is because of pride. So teach your child from a young age about pride and humility. Why not? I know it's embarrassing to say I'm sorry, honey. I know it is, but you messed up and it was hurtful, and we really need you to say I'm sorry to show us that you messed up. God wants you to be kind to one another, and it would be really good for you to say sorry right now. Just model humility, teach it to them, say it yourselves. Be quick to say I'm sorry when you mess up, even especially to your kids. Be quick to say I'm sorry. Like if you can't say I'm sorry, how do you expect them to know how to say I'm sorry? Um, I have no problem apologizing after all these years. I have no problem apologizing to my kids when I mess up. I can. It wasn't always that way. It was harder, but it got easier as you. Well, with 46 kids, let's just say I have to say it a lot. So I guess I'm a pro now at apologizing and saying I'm sorry if I need to. I don't mind anymore. It kind of something's turned in me where it's a little bit easier to say it and mean it. I really am sorry. but it's hard for us sometimes to model that when our kids are young. So I can remember one time, and probably the third or fourth month of our ministry in India, and I can remember the first time I apologized to one of my kids, and one of our team said, "Why are you apologizing to the child? They're younger than you. You know, they're so small. You should not apologize to them. They're going to take advantage of you." And that culture, it was very. It's you don't say sorry to children, and as we grew and as time went on, I noticed that she had started getting better at apologizing, and it was really sweet to see. I'll clearly remember the first day she ever apologized to somebody, and I was like, "Wow, it's amazing the power of humbling yourself and saying I'm sorry." So I'll say this for our kids that don't naturally feel empathetic or compassionate, or have a hard time saying I'm sorry, or have a difficult time showing remorse or even feeling remorse. What do? We have to teach them. We have to teach them before it's too late. But the truth is, it's never too late. You can teach them anytime. But while they're young, as long as you can, start teaching them how to say I'm sorry. Get creative. Watch shows that celebrate compassion and humility. Avoid shows that are full of garbage and that don't show those kind of things. Think about what's going into your kids' heads and hearts. Assuming that you're doing that, you can just model. You can model it, talk about it, have devotions and family time about it. Talk about compassion. Talk about kindness. Talk about empathy. Don't assume that everybody just has this inborn, natural understanding of those things. We have to teach our children. Some of your kids do have a natural compassion. I have one of my kids. She's not the most compassionate person in the world at all towards people. But, if a dog were to die, you would find her in tears holding the puppy in her hand. I mean, she's very compassionate towards puppies. We just have to teach our kids, to have that compassion towards people. And so all of our kids are wired differently, and don't get discouraged because one of your children is a little tougher than the others. Nothing's fundamentally wrong with that child. It's just not how they're wired. Talk about humility, saying I'm sorry. Talk about compassion, empathy in your family times. Try to, if you know something about me and you start watching this podcast, I'm all about intentional, proactive parenting, not accidental, reactive parenting. There's a totally different, intentional and proactive, not accidental and reactive. So teach them, not just when they mess up, but teach them in the good times, in the family devotions. Teach them the values you want them to have. Don't just wait till something happens and then, I've got to teach them now. I've got to tell them to say I'm sorry. I've got to get them to have compassion. You actually want to be proactive and teach them about this when things are going really well. At the same time, I want you to realize it's not natural for everybody to easily say I'm sorry. It's not easy for everyone to have compassion or to feel remorse. One thing raising so many kids has taught me is that we're all wired differently. It doesn't mean you don't spend time teaching your 2-year-old to humble himself and say sorry and please forgive me, but it does mean that you don't look at it as one giant character flaw in your child. They may have lots of other strengths to lean into. And so sometimes if you look at that and just my kid's messed up, they don't have any, they're not showing compassion. They will never say, I'm sorry. They're stubborn. And you look at this as some huge character flaw. But the truth is everybody's just wired differently. I have kids that are super compassionate and kind and lazy as all get out. They will not lift a finger to help in their rooms, clean up their rooms or anything else. I have to get after them. I have children that are incredibly good at school and they make straight A's, but they're stubborn as snakes, And I have other kids that are stubborn as can be, but man, they're so friendly. They make friends with anybody. Like everybody's wired differently. And so we don't want to highlight one thing as some giant character flaw that's somehow we can't get over. We just need to recognize the differences in our kids and kind of have a little bit of grace. Work with them on helping on the flawed areas, but have a lot of grace and don't overdo it, thinking it's like the one thing that is the worst thing ever, right? So I have a story. I have a particularly stubborn child that he was in our family. He was 3 years old. He's in our family, and he was not very good at saying I'm sorry. He is not easily going to say I'm sorry. He doesn't really operate. He doesn't really show remorse. He didn't show remorse, when he was younger. It was very hard for him. And one day he karate chopped one of his sisters in the stomach, and just with a karate kicked her actually with his foot in the stomach. And of course she cried, and she was fine. She was a little bit older than him, and she was fine. But I over exaggerated the injury, And the reason I did this is a way that you can help your children who don't say sorry or who don't show remorse. I literally had to help him internalize the feelings of compassion, remorse, those kind of things. And so I would say things, oh my goodness, I can't believe you kicked her in the stomach. It must have hurt so bad. And she was kind of playing along a little bit, but I kind of had him go get a Band-Aid, even though there was nothing a Band-Aid could do, and it wasn't even needed. But he had to go get a Band-Aid and come and give it to us, and we had to help, put it on her wound. I made him sit beside her on the couch and basically see to her every need. Oh, do you need a glass of water, honey? Go get her a glass of water. He had to go get a glass of water and bring it to her. And make sure she needs a tissue. She's been crying. Go get a tissue. And I just kind of made him wait on her hand and foot, and the whole time, oh, it must hurt so bad. This is the saddest thing. I can't imagine how it must feel to get kicked in the stomach. It must hurt so bad. And by the end of this 20-minute, I should have gotten an Academy Award. I was awesome. I was such a good actress. And kudos to her too. She was playing along. But it helped, it helped at the end of it for him to actually feel like he really got it. And he was really genuinely apologetic. This is a child who does not say sorry. But I had to kind of almost internalize those things inside of him when it's not internal for him. I mean, a lot of my kids, it's very internal. They immediately get it. But for him, I've had to teach him how to sympathize with somebody and to have compassion. And so he was able to say I'm sorry with a full heart after my 20-minute Oscar nominated performance. So she became a hypochondriac after that. No, I'm just kidding. She didn't. Finally, whenever sorry is said genuinely, one thing I try to always do with my kids is to say things like, I forgive you. Not, it's okay, no problem, thank you. It's just simple, I forgive you. And then I forgive them. And I teach the person they're saying sorry to. If they've hurt somebody, a brother or sister, going to them and saying, I forgive you. And I teach the other one to say, let them know that you forgive them. I forgive you, and then instead of just saying it's okay or it's no big deal, we just, let's own it. It's not okay. It is a big deal, but we forgive you, and then we let it go. We really, really, really forgive them and move on. So those are some things that I think that have helped me over the years and I hope it helps you too with your children. And I think it will. So I hope it really helps. And thanks for the great question. If you have a question that you'd like answered on the show, you can either email me at asktammyma@gmail.com, or if you don't mind, send me a video of you asking a question just like this viewer did. Just send me a short video, less than 30 seconds, letting me know what the problem is, and I'm ready to air it over here and hopefully answer it and give some help, because I'm sure you're not the only parent struggling with the same thing. Trust me. So your question could help many, many more parents. Welcome to Arumai-isms. This is the part of the show where I just share funny quotes from our youngest. She said a lot of funny things over the years. And so, here's a quote from Arumai. She was 6 years old at the time. I wonder what was wrong with Arumai today, as she just stared at me as I guzzled down the water that she brought me in a cup. She smiled and she said with all sincerity, I hope you know, Mama, I hope you know I totally saved your life just now. And I was like, what? And then she just said, well, there were some bugs in your water and I picked them up out with my bare hands before I gave you the water. So, Arumai-isms.